I still remember the scent of the flowers. Lilies and white roses, my wife's favorites. They were trembling slightly in his hands, as if even they knew they didn't belong there. He stood at the doorway of the courthouse, a tall man with silver hair and eyes that carried more years of silence than words. People moved around him, lawyers, reporters, strangers, but he didn't move. He just stood there, holding those flowers. Staring at me, Mr. Cameron, my father-in-law, the man who never came to my wedding. That morning, the sun was too bright for the kind of day it was. Bella and I had said our last words inside the courtroom, quiet, cold, and final. No shouting, no tears, just signatures and silence. It felt less like an ending and more like a funeral. When I walked out, I saw him waiting there. And for a moment, my heart stopped, because part of me had spent years wishing that he would come back. Not to my life, but to hers. He took one step toward me, his voice soft, almost breaking. "Levi, these were meant for your wedding day." I didn't know what to say. There are moments when words simply lose meaning, when time folds over itself and regret becomes louder than sound. That was one of them. He held out the flowers, and I couldn't move. Behind him, the wind scattered a few petals across the courthouse stairs, white against gray concrete. Like a memory refusing to die. It's strange how life works. When I married Bella, I was the happiest man alive. Everyone said we wouldn't last, that a poor man like me had no place in her golden world. But she smiled and told me love was enough. For a while, I believed her. And now here we were, love buried under the weight of pride, money, and silence. And her father, the man who refused to bless our beginning, had come to witness our end. Sometimes, love doesn't die because of hate. It dies because people wait too long to say the words that could have saved it. If someone had told me that the woman I'd one day marry would come from a world made of glass towers and private jets, I would have laughed. My world was small, a rented apartment above a bakery, the smell of bread in the mornings, and a job fixing computers for people who barely knew my name. That's where I met Bella. She came in one rainy afternoon, holding a broken laptop and a paper cup of coffee that was already cold. I remember the way her hair stuck to her cheeks and how she smiled like she wasn't used to asking for help. "Can you fix this?" she asked, setting the laptop on my desk. Her voice was soft but carried something proud, the kind of tone that came from people who grew up being obeyed. I wiped my hands on my jeans and nodded. "I can try, but it might take a day." "That's fine," she said, "so long as it remembers me when it turns back on." I didn't understand what she meant until later. Over the next few days, she came back again and again, sometimes with excuses about updates, other times just to talk. She'd tell me about her office job at her father's company, about business meetings, about the pressure of being Cameron's daughter. I listened, maybe too closely. She said she liked the simplicity of my shop, the quiet hum of machines, the smell of coffee, the sound of rain tapping the glass. And I liked the way she looked at everything as if it was new. It didn't take long before she stopped being a customer and became something more. We started going for walks after sunset, down empty streets, sharing one umbrella. I'd tell her about my dreams of starting my own small tech service. She'd tell me about the freedom she never really had. She once said, "Everyone around me wants something. Levi, my dad, my friends. They all expect something from me. But with you, it's just quiet. Quiet." That's what our love was made of. Not noise, not drama, just the peace of knowing someone sees you. But quiet things rarely survive in loud worlds. When she told her father about me, silence followed. Weeks passed before she spoke of it again. Then one night, sitting by the window in my apartment, she said in a trembling voice, "He said, I'm throwing my life away." I asked her what she thought. I don't care." She smiled, but her eyes looked scared. The night she told me she wanted to marry me, I didn't believe it at first. Not because I didn't love her, but because love that pure didn't belong to people like me. Still, we planned it. A small wedding. A white dress, borrowed flowers, a few friends. I sent Mr. Cameron an invitation myself. Wrote it carefully, hoping he'd see the sincerity behind every word. He never replied. On the morning of our wedding, Bella waited by the window. Every time a car passed, her eyes lit up and then dimmed again. She kept whispering, "Maybe he's just late." He wasn't late. He just wasn't coming. When she walked down the aisle, her smile was beautiful, but her hands were cold. I remember holding them, feeling how fragile she was beneath her strength. That day, I promised her everything I had, which wasn't much, but it was real. After the ceremony, I found her sitting alone for a moment, looking at her phone. Her father had sent a message, just one line. "You made your choice." She didn't cry. She just nodded, as if she expected it. I told her we'd build our own world, far from his shadow. And we did, at least for a while. Those first few months were soft. We had no luxury, but we had laughter. I'd come home tired, and she'd greet me with stories from her new office job. We'd eat cheap takeout on the floor, talk about everything and nothing. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch her staring at her phone, scrolling through photos from her old life, the mansion, the parties, the dresses, and I knew she missed it. Still, she stayed. For me, for love. Back then, I thought love could fill any empty space. I didn't know that silence, the kind her father left between us, could grow into something that love alone couldn't heal. The first year of our marriage was made of small joys. Waking up beside her felt like waking inside a dream I didn't deserve. She'd hum while making coffee, wear my old shirts when she painted, and smile every time I fixed something around the apartment like it was magic. But love is quiet until life starts speaking louder. Bills came, work hours grew longer, and the distance between what she was used to and what we had began to stretch like a thread about to snap. She never complained, not directly, but I saw it in the way she looked at store windows she couldn't afford to walk into, in the way she stayed longer at her office, in the sighs she tried to hide. Then one night, she came home late, her perfume different, her eyes distant. "Rough day?" I asked. "Just long," she whispered, removing her earrings slowly, one by one. We sat in silence at the table. The soup had gone cold. She pushed it aside and stared at the wall. "Levi," she said softly, "do you ever feel like we're pretending?" I didn't understand at first. Pretending, like we're living in a story that sounded romantic in the beginning. But now it's just hard. Her words didn't sting. They sank, deep, like stones in still water. I reached for her hand, but she pulled it back gently. That was the first time she ever did that. From that night on, something invisible settled between us. We still loved each other, but it felt like we were standing on opposite sides of a closed door. A few weeks later, she started mentioning her father again, not with anger anymore, but with something else, nostalgia. "He called my office today," she said once, "just to ask if I'm happy." "And what did you say?" "That I am," she smiled faintly, "but I think he knew I wasn't. I didn't know whether to be jealous of him or grateful that he cared again." But slowly, his voice, the one that used to control her world, started slipping back into her heart. He began sending small things, a luxury bag for her birthday, a card on our anniversary. She'd say, "It's just a gesture," but I could see how her fingers lingered on the ribbon, how her eyes softened. Love has enemies, and sometimes they're not people, they're memories of comfort. One evening she told me she'd been offered a position at her father's company. It was supposed to be just a few weeks, helping with a marketing campaign. "Levi, it's good money," she explained. "We need it, and maybe it'll show him that I can handle my own life." I didn't argue. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that love was strong enough to survive the echo of her old world. But the more she worked there, the less she came home. Her father's world had a rhythm, fast, cold, glittering. It pulled her in. She started dressing differently, speaking differently. Even her laugh changed, softer, polite, careful. When she'd return home, she'd talk about her day, the projects, the clients, the dinners. I'd listen quietly, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't belong in those stories. She once said, "You should meet my father again, Levi. He's changed. Maybe you two could talk." I smiled, but inside, I felt something small break. Because when someone says, "Maybe you could talk," it means they've already chosen a side. Months passed. The warmth between us became routine. We still lived together, but I could feel the gap widening. She began sleeping facing the wall, her breathing steady and far away. I'd lie awake, counting the seconds between her sighs, wondering if love could fade this quietly. One night, she came home late again. Her heels clicked on the floor, sharp, expensive. She poured herself a drink, something she rarely did. "He wants to meet you," she said suddenly. "My father, tomorrow night. Dinner at the hotel." I didn't ask why. I just nodded. Inside, I felt like I was being summoned to a test I didn't know how to pass. The next evening, I wore my best shirt, the one she'd ironed on our wedding day. She looked stunning, calm, almost regal. When we reached the restaurant, Mr. Cameron was already there, sitting by the window. His posture perfect, his face unreadable. He didn't stand to greet me, just looked me over, then gestured to the chair across from him. The waiter brought wine. I declined. "He didn't, Levi," he began. "You're a decent man. I'll give you that. But my daughter was raised for more than—" "This," Bella tried to interrupt. "Dad, please, no," he said firmly. "Let me speak." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I'm not here to insult you. I'm here to offer you a way out." He took out an envelope, thick, white, heavy, and placed it on the table. "Enough money to start your own business. Enough to live comfortably. All I ask is that you let her go." The world went silent. Even the music faded. Bella froze, her lips parting, eyes wide with disbelief. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Protecting you," he said simply. I looked at the envelope, then at her, and in that moment, I realized something terrible. He didn't believe I'd refuse. He thought I'd take the money and vanish, because in his world, love always had a price. I pushed the envelope back toward him. "Mr. Cameron," I said softly, "you can buy a house, a car, a company, but you can't buy peace, and that's all I ever wanted for Bella." For a second, something flickered in his eyes, not anger, not respect, just surprise. He said nothing else. Dinner ended in silence, but that silence followed us home. Bella didn't speak for hours. Then, as I sat on the couch, she whispered, "Why couldn't you just take it?" Her words hit harder than his offer. "Because that's not love, Bella." "No," she said, turning away. "That's pride." And maybe she was right. Maybe my pride was as heavy as his. From that day on, she changed again. More distance, more late nights, more quiet. I still left flowers for her sometimes, small, wild ones from the roadside. She never threw them away, but she never said thank you either. Then one morning, I awoke to find a note on the table. Just one line. "I need to find myself again." She was gone. Days turned into weeks. I called, texted, nothing. I heard through a friend that she'd moved back into her father's house, that she was traveling for work. And I waited, not out of anger, but because hope is stubborn when love is real. 3 months later, she returned, looking beautiful, tired, and distant. She said she wanted to talk. We sat in the same room where we'd once planned our future. Her hands were trembling. "Levi," she whispered, "I tried. I really did. But every time I looked at you, I saw the life I left behind, and it scared me." I didn't stop her. "I couldn't some things end before you can even notice the moment they start to fade." That was the night she asked for a divorce. Not with anger, with exhaustion. And I said yes, because love, when it turns into pain, deserves peace. But peace doesn't mean absence of feeling. It means carrying the ache quietly. The morning of the divorce hearing felt strangely peaceful. The sky was pale blue, the kind that never promises anything. Not sun, not rain, just stillness. I dressed slowly, buttoning my shirt like a man preparing for a funeral he didn't want to attend. The court building wasn't far from where Bella and I once had coffee dates. Passing those streets felt like walking through ghosts. Every corner, every light, every smell carried a memory. Inside the courthouse, everything felt cold. Bella sat across from me with her lawyer, her hair tied neatly, her face calm but unreadable. We didn't look at each other much, maybe because both of us knew that the love we once held so tightly had quietly slipped through our fingers, and no one had the strength to reach for it again. When the judge spoke, his voice was firm, procedural, like he was reading the weather. I remember the scratch of the pen as I signed the papers. My hand didn't even tremble. Maybe it was already too tired, too. And just like that, it was over. No one clapped. No one cried. Only the faint echo of heels clicking against marble as Bella walked out, not even glancing back. I stayed a little longer, watching the empty courtroom. I thought of the first time she smiled at me in that repair shop, of our walks under one umbrella, of her laughter echoing through our tiny kitchen. And I thought of the message her father had sent her on our wedding day. "You made your choice." That line had followed us like a shadow. When I finally stepped outside, the air felt heavier than before. And there he was, Mr. Cameron, standing by the courthouse steps, holding white lilies and roses, Bella's favorites. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But when he looked up and our eyes met, I felt the years of silence collapse between us. He took one step forward, then another. His face was older, thinner, but his eyes, they carried something I hadn't seen before: grief. "Levi," he said quietly, "I'm sorry." Those words didn't belong to him, at least not the man I once knew. The last time I'd seen him, he looked at me like I was nothing. Now he looked at me like I was the only person left to understand him. He held out the flowers, his hands trembling slightly. "These were meant for your wedding day," he said again, his voice softer this time. But I couldn't bring myself to come. I didn't take them, not yet. There are moments that feel too fragile for action, where even breathing feels like it could shatter the air. "Why," I asked finally, "why didn't you come?" He sighed, a sound that carried more years than words ever could. "Because I thought I was protecting her. I thought if I stayed away, she'd realize that life with you would be too hard, and she'd walk away before she got hurt." He looked away, his jaw tightening. I told myself I was saving her. But the truth is, I was saving myself. From watching her choose something I didn't understand. He paused, his eyes glistening. "When she called me last year, she sounded different. Not angry, just tired." I realized then what I'd done, that my silence had turned into the very thing I feared, her unhappiness. I stood there quietly, the world narrowing around his voice. "She told me you never raised your voice at her," he continued. "Never blamed her, even when she left. She said you were kind." He laughed softly, the kind of laugh that hides pain. "You know, I used to think kindness was weakness, but now I see it was strength, the kind I never had." He looked down at the flowers, then back at me. "When she told me about the divorce hearing, I wanted to stop it. I tried to talk to her, to convince her to wait, but she wouldn't listen. She said it was too late." He stepped closer and whispered, "So I came today, not to stop it, but to tell you I was wrong." For a long moment, I said nothing. The wind picked up, lifting a few petals from the bouquet. They swirled in the air between us, white against the gray morning. I wanted to tell him that his absence had already done its work, that his silence had echoed through our marriage louder than any argument ever could. But all I could manage was a small nod. "She loved you?" I said quietly. "I know," he whispered. "And I loved her too. Didn't know how to show it." He handed me the flowers. I took them this time, not for her, not for him, but for the years that would never come back. We stood there, two men bound by love for the same woman, both too late in our own ways. I thought of how easily everything could have been different if he'd come to the wedding, if he'd said one kind word, if I'd swallowed my pride that night at dinner. But life doesn't rewrite itself. It only plays the same scenes until you learn the lesson you ignored. Before he left, Mr. Cameron reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He didn't hand it to me. He placed it on the courthouse bench. "It's not money," he said. "It's something I should have given her years ago." He turned and began to walk away. His steps were slow, steady, heavy. When he disappeared around the corner, I opened the envelope. Inside was a small photograph. Bella as a little girl standing in a garden, holding a single white lily. On the back, written in neat, faded ink, were just 3 words, "For when she's ready." That night, I went home and placed the flowers in a glass vase. I sat in the dark, watching them lean toward the window where the moonlight touched their petals. It struck me then how strange it was that the man who refused to bless our beginning had come to honor our ending, that the same hands that withheld love had brought flowers too late to save it. And yet, somehow, I wasn't angry. Because in that moment, I finally understood, people don't always hurt you out of hate. Sometimes they hurt you because they're afraid. Afraid to lose control, afraid to trust, afraid to let love be simple. Mr. Cameron missed my wedding not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to care the right way. He came to my divorce because, for the first time in his life, he did. When I closed my eyes that night, I remembered Bella's voice saying, "Everyone around me wants something." Maybe all I ever wanted was for her to be seen by me, by him, by the world she was caught between. And now, all that was left were flowers in the dark, and the quiet hum of a home that no longer echoed with laughter. Days passed after the divorce, but time didn't move the way it used to. Each morning, I'd wake to silence, the kind that pressed against your chest, reminding you that someone was missing. Her perfume still lingered in the corner of the room, faint but stubborn. Her books lined the shelf like ghosts that refused to leave. Even her mug, chipped on one side, stayed by the sink. I couldn't throw it away. People say healing starts when you let go. But I've learned that sometimes healing starts when you stop trying to erase what happened, when you simply sit beside your memories and let them breathe. So that's what I did. I'd sit by the window every evening, the vase of lilies still there. They began to wilt, petal by petal, until only their faint scent remained, a soft reminder that even beauty has its limits. And yet, I didn't replace them. It felt wrong, too. They weren't just flowers anymore. They were a message, one man's apology, another's acceptance, a woman's absence. A week later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name, written in the same elegant handwriting I knew by heart. Inside was a letter from Bella. Short, careful, honest, Levi. I don't know if this letter will make anything better, but I needed to say this. You were good to me. You were everything I needed, but I was too blinded by what I thought I deserved. I kept trying to fit you into my father's world and never realized you were building one for me of your own. Dad told me he saw you after the hearing. He told me about the flowers. He cried, Levi. I've never seen him cry before. Maybe this is life's way of teaching us timing, that love can be true, but not always meant to last. I hope you forgive me one day, not because I deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Bella. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it beside the photograph Mr. Cameron had left. They belonged together somehow, like two sides of a truth that finally made sense. That night, I went for a walk. The city was quiet, streetlights flickering like half-remembered promises. I passed the old bakery under my apartment, the place that had always smelled of warmth. The owner, she'd known Bella too, always asked about her, with that soft pity people have when they don't know what to say. You okay, Levi? She asked. I nodded, getting there. Sometimes that's the best answer you can give. Because healing isn't about saying, I'm fine. It's about saying, I'm still here. A few days later, I visited the small park where Bella and I used to walk in the rain. The same bench was still there, chipped, paint peeling, like time had moved on without permission. I sat down, watching the world go by. Children laughed in the distance. Pigeons fought over crumbs. A couple held hands, life continuing in its ordinary way. I pulled the photograph from my wallet, the one of Bella as a child, holding that single lily. I placed it on the bench beside me. You were loved, I whispered. Maybe not the way you needed, but truly. Then I smiled, not sadly, but softly, because for the first time, I wasn't thinking of what I'd lost. I was thinking of what I'd learned. A few weeks later, I got a call from Mr. Cameron. I hesitated before answering, unsure if my heart was ready to hear his voice again. Levi, he said, his tone quiet, almost unsure. I wanted to thank you. For what? For not hating me, for understanding her when I couldn't. There was a long pause before he added, I'm selling the company. Starting a foundation, something Bella suggested before she left the city. It's for people who start from nothing, like you did. His voice cracked slightly. She said you'd like that. I didn't know how to respond. So, I just said, she was right. He exhaled, the sound shaky, tired. Take care of yourself, Levi. You too, Mr. Cameron. When the call ended, I realized something had shifted. We weren't enemies anymore. We were simply two men who had finally run out of pride and found peace in what was left. In the months that followed, I started fixing computers again, but this time with a little more purpose. Not just for money, for people who needed help but couldn't afford it. It felt good, honest. Sometimes, when I handed back a repaired laptop, I'd think of Bella's first visit. Her laugh, her words, so long as it remembers me when it turns back on. And I'd smile, because it did. It remembered her in every quiet act of care. In every moment, I chose kindness over resentment. One evening, I decided to return the gesture. I went to the Cameron estate, not to see her, but to leave something behind. The gatekeeper recognized me, but said nothing. I placed a small bouquet, white lilies, again by the front gate, with a simple note, for when she's ready. No name, no address, just the same words her father had once written. Because love doesn't always end with goodbye. Sometimes it ends with, I understand now. When I walked away, I felt lighter. Not happy, not free, just lighter, the kind of peace that comes when you stop holding the past hostage. I looked up at the sky, soft pink fading into evening blue, and for the first time in years, I felt something like gratitude, grateful for the love that once was, grateful for the lessons buried in heartbreak, grateful for the silence that finally taught me how to listen. That night, I sat by the window again, the city humming quietly below. The vase was empty now, but I didn't mind, because the flowers may have wilted, but the forgiveness, the understanding, the quiet acceptance, those had finally begun to bloom. I used to think closure came with answers, that one day I'd finally understand why things had to end the way they did. But now I know closure isn't about knowing. It's about accepting that sometimes love's purpose was never to last, only to teach. Bella and I weren't meant to grow old together. We were meant to change each other. She taught me that love could be fierce and fragile all at once. I taught her that peace doesn't come from what you own, but from who you are when no one's watching. And Mr. Cameron, he taught me something too, that even the proudest hearts eventually learn how to kneel before regret. Months turned into a year. I rebuilt my life piece by piece, quietly, steadily. I didn't rush happiness this time. I let it find me in small ways, in a neighbor's smile, in the warmth of tea on a cold morning, in the comfort of knowing I'd survived something I once thought I couldn't. Sometimes I'd dream of her, Bella standing by the lake in her wedding dress, barefoot, laughing like she used to, and in the dream, she'd look at me and whisper, "It wasn't for nothing." I'd wake up with tears, but not sadness, just gratitude, because she was right. It wasn't for nothing. Every mistake, every silence, every too late gesture, they built the man I'd become. A man who understood that love isn't about possession, it's about presence. One evening, I walked by the courthouse again, the place where it all ended. The same marble steps, the same tall glass doors. Only this time, I wasn't there to lose something. I was there to remember how far I'd come. I looked around, imagining Mr. Cameron standing there with those flowers, his hands trembling, his eyes red. For the first time, I didn't feel pain. I felt empathy. Maybe that's what forgiveness truly is, not forgetting what someone did, but understanding why they did it. He missed the wedding because of pride. He came to the divorce because of love. It just took him too long to realize which mattered more. As I turned to leave, a gentle breeze brushed past, carrying the faint scent of lilies. It stopped me mid-step. I looked up, smiled faintly, and whispered to the air, "It's okay now," and maybe somewhere they both heard it. Bella, wherever life had taken her, and her father, wherever his regrets had carried him. That night I wrote one final line in my journal, the one I'd kept through every heartbreak, every small victory, every long silence. In the end, wealth can't measure the worth of love. Because I'd seen it, how money could buy the biggest house, but not a home. How luxury could fill a room, but never a heart. How flowers could arrive too late, and yet still mean everything. So now, I live quietly. No grand gestures, no fancy dreams, just the simple peace of knowing I loved honestly, and that's enough. And when I pass by a flower shop, I sometimes buy a single lily, not to mourn the past, but to honor it. Because every story, even the sad ones, leaves behind a little beauty, like a flower pressed between the pages of time, still fragrant, still remembered. And maybe that's what love really is. Not a promise to stay, but a memory that stays beautiful even after it ends.